I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the most flash Lexus hybrid that money can buy. You might be thinking the Lexus LC two-door is the brand's flagship vehicle, and in some ways it is. It's probably the most expressive Lexus that money can buy, but in actual fact, it's the LS sedan that sits at the top of the tree for this luxury Japanese automaker. The LS was the very first Lexus, and this one that I've brought along here, the LS 500h Sports Luxury, really is the pinnacle of what this brand is all about. It has a hybrid system designed to save you fuel and lower your CO2 footprint, and it also has the absolute maxed out equipment list that you can get on an LS. There are no options on this car apart from a few really bespoke customizations that you can do inside. All of the basic equipment is standard at this level, and you do pay for it, around $200,000 before on-road costs with this LS 500h Sports Luxury. But compared to a pinnacle S-Class or BMW 7 Series or Audi A8, there's actually relative value for money here. I know the phrase value for money at $200,000 is slightly hyperbolic, but look, even the most well-off people in the world might be looking for that kind of factor. Now, under the bonnet of the LS 500h, we've got a 3.5 litre petrol V6 teamed to an electric motor. The vehicle is rear-wheel drive only. You can't get an all-wheel drive option, but as we'll find out when we take the LS 500h out for a drive, you can either be silky and smooth in town using as little fuel as possible in this segment, or you can kick Jeeves out, and you'll actually find that this vehicle has a remarkable turn of speed out on a country road. But at all times, the LS 500h is large and in charge. That's how it looks, and that's how it feels. Here inside the Lexus LS, this brand really shows us their best possible level of finish, and you certainly know that you're sitting in something that's, worth over $200,000 with on-road costs included, but also something truly luxurious and opulent. And of course, that's what this class of car is all about. Now, this particular vehicle is quite handsomely specified in deep blue outside over this ochre semi-aniline leather, with beautiful open pore wood ornamentation and laser cut trim up here on the doors as well. So you feel really wrapped into this cabin. It is remarkably driver focused for a vehicle that's arguably more about those sitting in the back a lot of the time. But you're just ensconced in absolutely gorgeous fit and finish. Even here on the steering wheel, it's leather on the outside, and you just have this delicate little wood inlay. Very subtle, but just elevates the whole experience even further. Now, a lot of the cabin of the LS is quite high technology, but in almost a kind of 1930s, 1950s revival in some of the styling. We've got this really gorgeous Art Deco detailing up here on the dash in the strakes from the climate vents that extend the whole way across. And we've got this fascinating compartmentalizing of the gauges ahead of the steering wheel with an 8-inch digital cluster here on the Sports Luxury variant. And then you've got analog dials for your fuel and your temperature. Up here as well, we have these funny little kind of ears for the drive modes and also for your snow mode and turning off the traction control in the vehicle. So that's an interesting effect. It won't be to everybody's tastes, but personally I think that it's an interesting interior, and that's more than you get on a BMW 7 Series, for example, which is relatively generic and looks a lot like a 1 Series inside. Now, looking across here in the center, we've got a 12-inch screen. It does have the effect of feeling a little tilted away from the driver, which is slightly unusual, but it still works fine. So Lexus shied away from touchscreens for a long time, but they're really coming back. And vehicles like the new Lexus NX scrap the trackpad down here entirely, and that's a good thing because honestly it's a difficult interface to use while you're on the move. The LS has wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but not the wireless version you get in the Audi A8 or the BMW 7 Series. What we do have is a fantastic Mark Levinson reference stereo that sounds absolutely clear and crisp. We also have lots of other nice little details like a moisturizing air conditioning system in this car and a climate concierge which uses infrared sensors to detect when your body is hot, and it adjusts the seat cooling and the seat heating and the steering wheel heating and the temperature throughout the car to suit your actual heat levels as opposed to dialing in specifications, although you can do that as well if you want to. The seats themselves are extremely soft, 28-way adjustable, so if you can't get comfortable in these seats, you're really not trying. And in terms of practicality, we've got a cool double-sided armrest here, offering access to a fairly deep bin with 2 USB ports. And we've got big, almost like Alcantara lined or Nubuck lined door bins down here, which will take a water bottle. Above this very cool floating door grab here, which is just another pleasant little detail that you get in the LS. So that's the front. Let's take a look at the second row. The front seat of the LS is very accommodating, as we saw, but it's really all about the back here in the sports luxury variants. There is a around $5,000 cheaper F Sport version of the Lexus LS, which is styled a bit more aggressively outside and has a few changes to the chassis to make it go around corners faster. But the sports luxury still drives pretty well, but you get the full backseat package. I think it's called the executive package or something in America, with crazy levels of opulence here in the second row. And that's exactly how I would take it if I was in the market personally. So it may look relatively basic like this, but that's because we have not deployed the command center. Some new leather, so it's a little bit squeaky. But now this is down, we have a touchscreen between the seats here, which can do everything from the basic, like these sun blinds. There are 3 sun blinds per side to make sure that not even a glint of sunlight is allowed to hit your boss's head. You can also have heating and cooling for the outboard seats here. You have massage for the outboard seats. You have full controls over the audio system of the car and other features. We've got the rear sunshades, we've got the lights. You can drive a lot of the system through this screen. We've also got, you know, cup holders and storage and rear air vents and all that. Plus vanity mirrors up here in the ceiling, which just, you wouldn't want the light to suddenly come on, you know? You want it to be, it just comes on ever so gradually, you know? Nothing is allowed to surprise you or disrupt the serenity in this car. But it's really all about the person sitting in the left side rear seat in a right-hand drive LS, because you have a crazy ability to push the front passenger seat all the way forward. And I mean, it goes so far forward you think it's some kind of joke, before this seat reclines into what can really only be described as a business class style seat for long distance drives. So, you know, while most of the time probably you wouldn't be spending a huge amount of time in this vehicle on the way to an airport or something here in Australia, if, for example, you commute from Sydney to Canberra, a drive of about 3 hours, sitting on this seat with a full ottoman with an absolutely absurd amount of legroom is, you know, that's a pretty good way to go. It certainly beats a Qantas 737 in my opinion. Here around the back of the LS, it really is a prerequisite for a luxury sedan like this to have a generous amount of boot space, particularly because a lot of the clientele that own these cars own them so that they can drive others around. Now, naturally there's a power tailgate, and that opens up to reveal 480 litres of space. Now, the actual shape of the boot of the LS is pretty odd, and so you have to get a little bit creative with how you slot your suitcases in. But as you can see, I must have a creative streak, because I've been able to get all 3 of the chasing suitcases into this boot, despite the fact it looks relatively tiny when you first open it up. The reason for that is because sports luxury variants of the LS in Australia are fitted with that full rear seat package. That's an option in some other markets, and so naturally that eats up some of the boot space, and it also means that you can't fold those rear seats down. So what you see here is what you get, but we then have the ability to drop that boot manually. Oh, I should say electronically, because you wouldn't want to have to do it manually at $200,000. And just before we get this car out onto the road, we'll talk about running costs and Lexus Encore Platinum. So what's it going to cost you to run the Lexus LS 500H? Well, potentially not as much as you might think. The big chunk is obviously in the purchasing of this car, but then the running costs are relatively limited. They start with servicing. The first 3 are capped, and the intervals are 12 months and 15,000 kilometers, and they're priced at $595. So that's actually quite a bit cheaper than some of the other vehicles in this full-size luxury segment. The warranty on the vehicle is 4 years. That's not quite as good as the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, which is covered under a 5-year warranty, it must be said. And the fuel consumption of the vehicle can be really quite limited. In town, where you're really tapping into the benefits of the hybrid system, you'll be able to do about 7 litres per 100 Ks, which is quite impressive. Out on the open road, and with a bit of country touring thrown in, you'll manage more like 9 or 10 litres per 100 kilometres. But keep in mind that the twin turbo version of this car, which runs without a hybrid system, is always using 30 or 40% more fuel than this vehicle, particularly at low speed where it doesn't have that electric motor assisting it. The last thing I'll mention as well is that because this is a Lexus L series car, you get membership of the Lexus Encore Platinum Club for 3 years, which gives you benefits like valet parking vouchers, fuel discounts, and also the ability to swap the LS for an LC Coupe, an LX four-wheel drive, and a bunch of other Lexus models that you can take away for up to 8 days at a time over several periods. So if you own this car, but you want to go to the snow, you can swap into something like the LX, which is a pretty cool feature that not many other manufacturers have offered before in Australia. So what's the Lexus LS 500h like to drive out on the road? Well, for starters, it's an incredibly dignified experience. I mean, that's what this class of car is all about. Effectively making driving as relaxing as possible. And as we saw before, there's ample room to sit in the second row of this car, so if you prefer to be driven than do the driving, the Lexus is a nice way to travel. But there is something in this car for keen drivers as well, because the dynamics of the LS are actually pretty good. And I think you can tell that from outside the car. It's got a pretty sporty stance, it's incredibly low slung, has those massive wheels, low profile tires. So while the mission of the LS out in the world isn't to be a sports sedan, it actually isn't a bad sports sedan. So I'll come to the ride and handling a bit later. First of all, let's remind ourselves of the engine choices with this car. So on the channel you can find reviews of both the petrol and the hybrid versions of the LS, but the LS 500, the vehicle that really, I guess, carries the flag for the LS as a powerful combustion engine vehicle, which is exactly how it started. That's a 3.5 litre twin turbo V6 these days, making 310 kilowatts of power. And that is the engine I probably would go for right out of the blocks. It's 30%, 40% thirstier than the hybrid in the real world, but it's so silky, refined, and then has a real turn of pace to it as well. But for LS buyers that do want to limit their fuel consumption and emissions and still enjoy, plenty of power, you can also team a naturally aspirated version of the 3.5 litre engine to an electric hybrid system, and that's what you get in the LS 500h. Now, most of the time the systems are working in tandem, and they produce a really good chunk of power and plenty of torque as well. So this isn't electrified in the sense that it's trying to be a low power option in the range. There's still plenty of go in the hybrid, and at low speeds when you take off from rest, it will try and prioritize driving in EV mode, but that doesn't last as long, or it's not as strong on its own as, say, a RAV4 hybrid or something, which really tries to keep you in EV only mode as much of the time as possible. With the LS, you do get that effect at low speeds, and even right now, cruising at 77, it's just gliding along on electric power. But if I put my foot down, it wakes up the V6 straight away, because it's, part of being a relaxing drive means you would never want to feel like the car wasn't ready to go. And so you don't get that sensation at all in the LS. And as you would expect for the flagship Lexus sedan, the step between electric power and petrol power in this car is really refined. You can definitely detect it if you're a keen driver as the engine starts to turn over and delivers its power and torque in a different way to the linearity of an electric motor. But it's a very refined step, and that petrol engine never gets thrashy or annoying. There's a lot of sound insulation at work in the LS 500h, and it creates an experience that's refined. But I guess the hybrid does make me wonder kind of who's going to buy it going forward. I think certainly for fleet car drivers, or not so much fleet car drivers, but hire car drivers, chauffeur drivers, who are looking for a conventionally fueled vehicle. I mean, you put petrol in the tank of this, not electricity, that do want a low consumption option. will continue to enjoy the LS. But for private buyers who are seeking a zero emission limousine, options like the new Mercedes EQS are probably going to make more sense or have more appeal to those people, which is partially the reason why I prefer the LS 500, which is non-hybrid, the 3.5 twin turbo, because I think that's what this car is really all about. However, no matter which engine you go for, the ride and handling is pretty good in the LS. The ride is mostly serene. You get a nice sort of undulating character from the dampers over most bumps. However, because we have those big wheels, pretty licorice thin tires, the ride can get a little bit edgy, a little bit unsettled over the sorts of hard edges we get here in Sydney on our concrete roads. So partially because you can't get a smaller wheel, there are other sedans which are even more comfortable than the LS over those sorts of bumps, but certainly as an interstate touring car, this is lovely, and its high-speed ride is particularly good. Now, you can actually dial up the effort a little bit and start piloting the LS with a bit more dynamism. The steering's good, it's light and it's quick, but the steering wheel's small and there's a good connection to the front wheels, and you can kind of see the prow of this boat and really get it moving pretty nicely through the corners. It doesn't tip over too much in the corners either. It stays fairly level. We've got rear air suspension in the car as well, which helps out in that regard. Refinement, as I've mentioned, is really impressive. And safety is good too. We've got strong lane tracing, AEB, adaptive cruise, blind spot monitoring, 360-degree camera, forwards and reversing AEB, so you feel fairly cocooned in the LS. So those are my opinions on the updated Lexus LS 500h Sports Luxury. Obviously, this is a niche vehicle for a niche customer, somebody that wants the most special Lexus that you can buy with the fuel-saving engine. Look, personally, I think the twin-turbo V6, the LS 500, is probably the way that I would go in this size car, because it really does feel like that spiritual successor to the original LS 400 that started the Lexus phenomenon just over 30 years ago. But I can certainly appreciate how well Lexus have been able to combine those attributes in the hybrid version of the LS. What I would point out though is that if you're looking for a full-size luxury sedan and you want to lower your CO2 footprint to the maximum extent, then a full electric option like the forthcoming Mercedes-Benz EQS is probably going to be even further up your alley, and it may be worth waiting to test drive that car as well. But let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're there, make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.